Hello, Daniel Lee, Plastering and Rendering Limited here. Today we are following on from yesterday's video where we bonded some bathroom walls. And today we are going to plaster them. So first things first, now that the bonding has gone rock hard, and we didn't quite have time yesterday to plaster it straight after, so I'm now going to have to prime the wall. I'm actually using neat SBR. I'm going to give it a nice thorough coating. This will help hold the suction. It does also have the added bonus of creating a nice waterproof layer as well, which in a bathroom can't hurt. Although, as I mentioned in the previous video, that wall is actually a dry wall. It's in the dry zone. They're going to have it protected. It's going to, I believe, they're going to get it wallpapered. Perhaps an unusual choice for some in a bathroom, but I think that's what the customer would like. See, I make sure to prime thoroughly. Now, this video, I've had some people ask for some more real-time videos. They're saying they're going a bit too quick. So you'll have to bear with me on this video. A lot of it is at real speed. I've slightly sped up the priming process, but I'm then going to plaster this with Thistle multi-coat finish. And a lot of that I've done at real speed. I have to excuse the funky camera movements. I'm still familiarising myself with a new camera, just getting used to. You didn't actually see this in the last video, but there was a couple of a socket, a wire, a little bit of making good around there that was also bonded yesterday. And there was also a niche in the side wall that the customers had built as well that they would like plastering. So now that's primed, I will give that, it's relatively warm in the house. That's had probably half an hour, I think, but it's completely sort of nice and touch dry now and ready to mix up. You see, I've got my little 18-volt drill there with a mixing paddle. For one bag of plaster, or 125 kilogram bag, it's brilliant. It suits me absolutely fine. The battery, I mean, I've got quite a few. It's a Milwaukee drill. I've got quite a few batteries actually, so that's not an issue. Although one battery, I don't know off the top of my head, but easily do. They tend to last me a day or two before I need to charge them. I just find it quite convenient. A big plasterer's drill is perhaps a little bit easier on the hand, but after doing it so long, that doesn't really make any difference to me. For this room, I'm going to mix up one full bag. It's not a massive amount of meterage. You can tell from the angle it's quite a tight room, as a lot of bathrooms can be, but it is a little bit faffy. There's some. So when mixing, I've got my bucket trowel. Make sure you give it a good scrape around the sides, because it has a tendency to clump the plaster, to clump a little bit around the sides. Give it another couple of up with me. You'll notice I've got a bucket with some water next to my bucket. That's my wash-out bucket. I will always, it's probably a third full of water. I will use that to clean my tools as I go. I'll pop my bucket down in there and it just stops it really on the clean as you're plastering. You could get a much bigger mixing paddle, plasterer's mixing paddle, and do that a bit quicker. But I've been doing it so long now, I've tried so many different size paddles over the years. I find I'd rather mix for an extra minute for the convenience. You'll notice I can just whip that drill head off, pop the little drill outside. It doesn't take long to clean the head. Out of the room as well, it's quite a cosy room, so the less tools in there, the better for me. Finish making sure, washing the bucket trowel and washing the drill. And then before we plaster, I'm going to use that red bucket scoop, so I've just wet that. And then I'll use a hawk and trowel as well, which I will also wet before I start. This just helps the plaster, it just stops the plaster from sticking to the board too much and sticking mostly to the back of the trowel as well. Now to clean my mixing paddle, I've actually got a little, it's an alloy wheel cleaner. It's incredibly useful. It works really well. Again, there's so many different brushes. You can use a paintbrush, you can use a brush from a brush and dustpan. That's a popular choice. Other type of car cleaning brushes, all sorts. I have known plasterers use sponges and just get the hand soaked, just get a sponge in there. I prefer to keep my hands dry if I can. See the niche there, there's a little niche in there, that's the top, back and side in that niche wants plastering as well. It's a bit difficult to see from this angle though. And then obviously the wall there that the toilet's going on, relatively straightforward. Then there's the door wall, which actually because it's a renovation, they've still got the existing architrave on the door, which adds a little bit more time. I've got to go around the door frame. In a new build, the architrave wouldn't be on there. The frame around the door wouldn't be on there, so it would be much easier to plaster. But it's not a problem. Okay, you notice this is all real time now as well. I've not sped any of this up. I do love that little red bucket scoop. I've mentioned it before, a lot of plasterers use spot boards, which is like a table that you can empty the bucket of plaster onto, and then you don't need to scoop the plaster onto the hawk, you can just slide it off the table. This room, many of the rooms, it's so tiny it just wouldn't fit in the room. So completely impractical on this particular job, and a lot of my jobs are like that, and I've been doing it so long now using a bucket scoop. I actually quite like the bucket scoop, even on jobs where I do have the room. Quite often I do have a spot board and stand, but it does tend to lie on the floor a lot out of use. Door wall there. Again, I always start at the tops, and I'm right-handed, so you would always start left to right as well when applying the top coat. See these little sections, the right-hand side of the architrave, because the architrave's there, I can't fit the trowel up the normal way. There are different sized trowels that you could use. I personally have been doing it so long now, I can just use the side, and I can use the bottom of my trowel. As you can see there, I just go sort of left to right and then up and slide it up. If you were a beginner, I would recommend getting a trowel the correct size, a smaller trowel, so you could just go up. But as you become more experienced, you'll find you can use all your sides of your trowel and still maintain a very nice flat finish. But as I mentioned, it is a little bit more time consuming. It'll slow you down a little bit. Because it's quite a small room, I have got a larger hop up, but it kind of fills the room, so I've opted to use, I've got a very heavy duty toolbox that I'm using as a step stool, because I'm just to give you an idea, it's probably a 2-foot box and I'm 6 foot, so that allows me to comfortably reach the top. And this is the first coat. And with the first coat, I like to get a nice covering over everything. This is renovation work, so I'm going over old painted plaster, some bits that I've repaired with bonding, so there's some scrim in different areas. It's basically ever so slightly thick because you've got different surfaces. I have flattened it all off, but there are sort of different sections. It's primed, so the suction is more controlled, but you will find you'll need to probably put it on a little bit thicker than you would if it was new plasterboard, for example. New plasterboard, and you might notice actually there's a small plasterboard panel in the bottom there as well. There's a little bit of plasterboard as well. But yeah, for the first coat I like to make sure all of the background's fully covered. I don't want to see any fibre tape or anything poking through. I like to make sure the first coat covers everything nicely. Moving on to the nice easy wall. See, start at the top. Now when doing that very first section at the top, I will actually put plaster onto the top of my trowel as opposed to the side. As you'll notice, when putting plaster on my trowel, I mostly use the top half of the trowel, sort of maybe the top 2/3. I will very rarely put the plaster on the whole of the trowel. I'll tend to put it at the top of the trowel when doing the ceiling lines, or I'll use the top 2/3 of the side of the trowel. It's a bit difficult to see in these angles. And again, when putting plaster on the wall, you want to have your trowel at about 22 degrees to the wall. So it's quite close to the wall. It allows you to press it to the wall. That way it doesn't all fall off your trowel onto the floor. You'll notice when I go up and down from the bottom, I'm holding my trowel almost completely horizontally until I touch the wall, and then I close the angle. That it almost allows the plaster to sit on the trowel like a table until you connect it to the wall. That'll stop it from falling onto the floor. Even though this wall has been primed with SBR, I can already tell the suction is a little bit higher than the rest of the room. Not too bad though, it's held absolutely fine, but I can tell this wall is just going to go off a little bit quicker than the rest of the walls. But had I not primed that, it would have been an absolute nightmare. It would have sucked the moisture out of the plaster so rapidly. I'd have struggled to even have got them on the wall. It very well would have likely cracked and crazed all over as well. And as I mentioned earlier, it's good from a waterproofing point of view as well. All that SBR is absorbed into the bonding coat. Not that it's needed, as I mentioned, it's a dry zone. Almost there. I believe this first coat took me about probably a little under 20 minutes. And it was a little bit faffy, but there's no need to panic or no need to rush. I had plenty of time. Wouldn't have wanted to do much more than this, given its intricacies. The niche I mentioned earlier. I think there might be some shelving in there perhaps once it's all been done. Little easy bit there, angle bead to angle bead, straight over plasterboard. So the first coat's on. I've skipped, now I'm mixing up the second coat. So the first coat was a full bag of plaster. So the second coat will be about half a bag. It's normally about half the amount of the first coat. Of course the first coat's sort of filled in any imperfections on the wall and flattened it off, and the second coat tends to be a much more even coat over the nice, hopefully smooth and flat plaster that you've just put on. Just to whip the paddle off, give it a clean, and then pop the paddle out of the way. Cleaning the tools is so important. You don't have to do it in this order. You could flatten the walls first, but I like to get that second coat mixed up, then give my walls a flatten with the speed skim. You can see that's a 4-foot speed skim. I find that just a great time saver, and it also, because it's 4 foot long, it really does help flatten the walls. Bear in mind, top coat plaster only goes on for about 3 to 5 mil at a push, but it's relatively thin, so it's not going to level any walls. That's what the undercoat plaster's for. But there are sort of small lumps and bumps you can get out because of imperfections. See that ball has sucked in, not too much, but it has sucked in much more than the others, so I'm able to actually apply quite a bit of pressure with that speed skim. And you'll notice as well that the amount of plaster I've gotten off that wall, there's hardly any. You don't, when you flatten a wall, you do not want to be removing the plaster that you've just put on there. You want very minimal, and the way to, or the best way I've found to do that, is to keep that speed skim or trowel keep the angle very tight to the wall. The wider the angle, the more plaster you'll find you'll scrape off. A little bit of a tricky spot around there. And a few wires make it a bit fun, but it's all part of it. You'll notice I keep that speed skim quite tight to the wall. Again, around it's all about 20 degree angle that you're after. The trowel, the speed skim, it's all about that. I might say even slightly steeper with the speed skim on at some points. I've speed skimmed the rest of those two walls, or almost, and you'll notice I've barely taken any of the plaster off at all. There will be a little bit on the speed skim, but not much. apologies for the camera angles. It's quite limited in this particular room. You notice that on the speed skim there, there's hardly a little bit of plaster, but not much. What helps is waiting. If you find lots of plaster is coming off when you're flattening it, it's quite likely that it's a bit too wet and it wants leaving a bit longer. So that took me about 20 minutes to get the first coat on. And so by the time I mixed up the second coat, I think I gave it about 10-15 minutes. Mixed up the second coat, so it had another probably 20 minutes, and it was firming in quite nicely. But it's a tricky one to gauge because it's affected. It's depending on the temperature. The temperature does have significant impacts on how quickly the plaster can dry. Notice that's corner trowel now. Now I like to go over all my corners. It's only really a rough go over at this stage because I've got another coat of plaster to apply, but I quite like to go over the corners, and then the corner trowel tends to leave lines at this stage that I will then use my trowel to go over. Okay, now all those corners have been troweled, the walls have been flattened. We are now ready to put the second coat on. And I've gone to first person mode here. So I'm applying the second coat over here now. It's quite nice, this second coat. Compared to the first one, it goes on lovely and smooth. See if you can see the angle of the trowel there. It's quite a steep angle, shallow angle rather. Allows you to really press that plaster all the way up the wall. Stop you from leaving a big old lump at the bottom of the skirting line. I will say, when plastering, the first 3 to 5 years are probably physically the toughest, or certainly I found the first 3, I'm pretty sure the first 3 years of plastering in my very early 20s, my right hand was pretty much a claw. I could barely open my right hand for the first 3 years, I seem to remember. But you know, you stick with it, and it does lessen, and well, everyone's got their own story, but I luckily, touch wood, feel as fit as a fiddle now. Managed to survive the early years, make it through. So once you've been doing it for a few years, it's actually, I mean, it is still physical, but you get the skills and the techniques down, and it just requires a lot less strength than when you first start. It still is hard work, of course, but your body adapts. You just got to persevere through those early years. And of course, it is hard work. It is hard wearing on your body. But if you look after your body, or at least in my experience, I am aware there's lots of plasterers out there that are their bodies are absolute wrecks in their 40s, even 30s, which is a bit sad. But you do need to look after your body. It's so crucial. Otherwise, you're just not going to last. And there you see, I've jumped over to the second wall there now. Plastering is great. It is a good physical job. It will give you a certain amount of strength and fitness, but it will not give you well-rounded strength or fitness, which is why I think if you want to be a good plasterer with injury-free, more specifically, you need to be doing some strength training and possibly some recovery training, physio. I'm quite a fan of hot roll training. I find that quite good for me personally. I've known other people that are really into their chiropractors or their sports massages. They get a real benefit from those. But that's what I mean when I say look after your body. Obviously, boring to talk about, but eating right, that certainly helps. Not known for that in the plastering trade, if I'm honest. But times are changing. Yeah, I don't know whether you can compare this from the first coat, but the amount the plaster is going much further with each trowel. You may have noticed as well, when applying the second coat, I actually did the bonding wall first, which when applying the first coat, I actually did the bonding wall last, and that is because of the suction. Again, whilst it's fine, it was nothing to worry about, because it was sucking in quicker than the other two walls, it just made sense to do it that way. And that way, as soon as I finish the second coat, I will then be able to wet trowel or flatten or wet trowel the bonding wall straight away, as it'll probably be ready for it, whereas the other two walls will need a little bit longer. The last bit there of the walls, I believe, second coated. Now I am flattening the walls, so I'm going over the corners with a corner trowel. It's still quite wet at this stage, so you're not going to get the wall perfect, but as it does tighten in, it does allow you to get the wall that little bit flatter. See where I'm going up the architrave there. In a new build, that architrave wouldn't be there, and I wouldn't have to bother butting up to it. I'd just be able to whiz all the way, put my trowel all the way around the door frame. Flatten. Again, sorry about the angles of this. It's a bit of a tight space. It's not easy to get a good angle. Jump forward another few minutes here. I believe I'm just about to start the wet trowel. So the plaster's had time to firm in. It's now sort of touch dry, but with a bit of dampness in the walls still. So the plaster is firm, but it still would leave ever so slight. It would still leave fingerprints, but the plaster wouldn't come off in your hands. So after you've just applied it, if you were to touch the wall, the plaster after you've just applied it, it would come off in little peaks in your hands. You'd end up with tips of plaster but after you've left it, it can be 5 minutes if it's a high suction wall, or it can be half an hour if it's a cold room. But when you touch the wall and it feels firm but leaves fingerprints but doesn't come off on your hand, that is normally a good sign that it's ready for a wet trowel, ready for its first wet trowel. What can happen if you go over it earlier than that, when the plaster's a little bit too soft, it's not firm enough to flatten, you can end up creating ripples, and then if you over trowel it, again going over the plaster too much, which is a very easy mistake to make when you're learning, because you're a bit more nervous about getting over the walls. That's certainly in my experience in my younger days. That can give the plaster a very ripply look, and not very pleasant at all. But yes, so it is possible to overwork the plaster, so it is crucial to allow the plaster to firm up. Again, the timing of plasters can be particularly challenging at the beginning, because it's not there's no black and white sort of timings, because it's so temperamental. If it's a warm room, it's going to go off quicker. If it's a cold room, it's going to go off, it's going to take longer. It's much easier to sort of over time you'll learn. You've probably seen, if you've seen plasterers plaster, you'll notice they have a habit of touching the wall, and you really do. Over time you'll just learn, oh, this feels ready. But there is a window, of course. You know, there's a window from finishing the second coat. If you give it a couple of hours, it is going to go rock hard. So you do need to keep an eye on it. So I'm giving that all a good wet trowel. And now I have jumped. So this is my flexi trowel. So I put the first and second coat of plaster, the flatten and the first wet trowel. I tend to use a stiff stainless steel trowel, and that allows you to put the plaster on firm. It puts the plaster on a lot flatter. But at this stage, after the first flatten, the wall is now pretty. It should be pretty flat. There are exceptions, but generally speaking, it should be pretty flat. So you can then use a flexible trowel. The reason I wouldn't use a flexible trowel to put the first or second coat on is because it's not rigid enough to flatten the wall. It will follow the lumps and bumps, and it can be prone to curving your skirting lines, your ceiling lines, your corners. It just doesn't have the rigidity that you want when flattening the second coat of plaster. But once you've got the wall flat, as flat as you want it, then I would say switch to the flexi trowel. It's, in my opinion at least, it seems to glide over the plaster with much less water needed, and also less pressure on the arm and wrist as well, which is always nice. I am a big fan of my flexible trowel. I didn't have that when I was learning. It was a relatively speaking newish thing. But my flexible trowel, I wouldn't be without it now. I'll tend to use it for the first, sometimes I'll wait till the second, but first wet trowel and second wet trowel, and polish. obviously at this stage it should be looking pretty flat now. An untrained eye might pop their head in and say, oh, you're finished. Whereas it can look that way to the untrained eye, but actually, if you want it to look right, if you were to stop now, it would be an incredibly rough wall, literally to the touch, to mark the following day once it's dry. So even though it looks fairly flat, it still really does need 2 more trowels at least. So I would say second wet trowel, which I believe I'm doing now, then a dry trowel, which is exactly as it sounds, and then a polish, which is basically another dry trowel. Each preceding coat helps seal the plaster in that little bit more. Running a paintbrush along the ceiling line as well to make sure that there's no excess plaster on the ceiling line. This is the stage I remove all the tape as well, the protective tape around the frame. I tend to do it on the first, sometimes second wet trowel, depending on how it's going. If it's pulling in nicely and it's looking really lovely and flat after the first wet trowel, I will whip it all off. If for whatever reason it's still not quite as flat as I'd like after the first wet trowel, I might wait till the second wet trowel. But you can see this is going quite nicely. Also with the tape, even though I actually allow a 5mm gap around all the edges when applying protective tape, it just saves tidying. You don't have to put tape around your architraves, and I know people that don't bother and they just give them a clean after, and you can do that, that's fine. I prefer to tape up and protect and then just whip the tape off at the end. I still might give it a little wipe if there's a bit that needs it. But pretty much almost all my work is now domestic work. I don't very often work on sites anymore, which I love. But the flip side is I have to protect much more thoroughly, and as I do it day in day out, I barely even think of it now. So I do have a tendency sometimes to overprotect, and if I'm honest, it's probably more habit now than anything. But you know, I figure it's better that way than the other way. It would be awful to miss a spot and then sort of not put some carpet protector down and then spill a bucket of plaster, and I mean, I've not done it yet, touch wood, but it's there, it's possible. it's a messy trade. So with the best will in the world, there is a high risk for an accidental spillage or a mess. Which is why I protect as thoroughly as I do. And we're almost there on this wall. I believe this, start to finish, this was probably around 3 hours. 3 hour set possibly. So although I'm showing you it all in real time, I have missed obviously the gaps in between waiting for the plaster to firm up a bit to tighten. Let's keep on top of the cleaning. Again, if I had a bit more room, I tend to normally put the cleaning bucket on a hop-up or a stool, so it's a bit higher up. But again, it's quite a small space, so I'm trying to keep it as empty as possible. pretty much it. They're just finishing off the last bit of the second wet trowel. So once this second wet trowel's finished, the walls should look pretty spot on. Shouldn't need any more attention. It is still soft though, so do be careful not to ding it or damage it. Now is the time to give everything a good old tidy, clean, wash out, tidy up, even load all the tools that you no longer need, which is pretty much everything bar your trowel and possibly paintbrush. So I would now have give everything a good tidy, get the room cleared, get the van loaded back up. There's my get the mixing bucket all out. Yeah. And then by the time I've had a good clear out and got all the tools tidied away, it'll be ready for its dry trowel and polish. And I like to keep blue roll. I do keep it in the van. It's not too messy, and the floor is fully. I've put carpet protector down, even though the floor's not down yet. But where I've washed the tools, there has been little splashes and spillages, so a bit of blue roll on hand is always useful. I'm a very big fan of the big wipes that you can buy from Toolstation as well. Fantastic things. I do use them quite a bit as well. There's the 4-foot speed skim. It came with one of those protective plastic clips that go on the edge. It's got its own special safe place in my van as well. Pretty much just finishing up here now. It's all gone very well. Give the trowel a quick clean off, and that is the finished bathroom. To show you, there's the niche. You couldn't really see it earlier, but you can see there it's the little ceiling, and the side and the back wall was plastered as well. That's come out lovely. Again, they can be, and the back wall, they can be a bit tricky when you first start, so I'd recommend getting trowels that could fit. Lovely.